Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Alien, or Adele in the default world. I'm one of the alt space Burning Man world builders and a Disorient camper. Burning Man is often a place and a time to get away, but it's also where we go to recharge, have life-altering experiences and conversations. So in building this year's Cyber Burn, we wanted to make sure that some of this is captured. And so thanks for joining us for this really important and very timely conversation. I would like to introduce one of our camp founders, Leo Villareal, who is an artist who works in the medium of light and cities. And our fellow burner, Marlon Williams, who is a veteran of 9 years and an urbanist, working on making cities more equitable. And yeah, I'll let you guys have the conversation.
Thanks so much, Adele, for getting us all set up. You know, it's just a pleasure to have some time to speak with you, Marlon, and to hear some of your ideas. And I guess wondering what you're doing with your year off from the playa.
My year off has been more work than any time before. In many ways, we are continuing to work at Que Viva under the leadership of Fabiana Rodriguez. That was my camp last year. We did in terms of trying to really push Burning Man to think about radical inclusion as racial inclusion. All the events that are happening in the world around the uprisings, I think, really give us a sense that the work that we were doing there in trying to create spaces where we push back against white supremacy and create spaces where Black can truly be beautiful in every place was in some ways ahead of its time, and we were very honored to be part of that movement in many ways. And so thinking about the work to be done post Burning Man, I often say that Burning Man starts once you leave or during Exodus. And this year we've been gifted some extra time to really do the work of trying to take those values, those ideas, those inspirations into the world. And so for me, it's been really focused on radical inclusion, thinking about what that really means to live that value, how to be in the movement around racial justice, and using Burning Man principles as a launching pad for some of that work, and the Burning Man community as a community that's held and loved me throughout this journey.
Great, awesome. So this is your gift back to the Burning Man community?
Yeah, Burning Man has given me so much. My story of Burning Man is essentially a love story. I remember I met my wife 10 years ago, and in our first date, she mentioned that she had tickets to Burning Man, and I decided that I was going to make that date work because I wanted to go to this place that I'd heard of, but I'd never met someone who had been there. My wife is white, and like I didn't know any people who had gone to this like magical place I'd once heard of. But going there, we've returned every year for the last 10 years of our relationship, except for one, the year of the birth of our daughter. And we had a little mini burn here at our home, and we're going to do that again tomorrow. And so it's given me my love. It's given me my child when we were struggling to have a child. Like the Burning Man community is the one that held and loved us through that journey. And I always say that my daughter is a child made of dust, magic, and community. And so that's been the gift of my life, and I'm trying to give that back to the community that I love.
Really beautiful. I completely sympathize. I have a 17-year-old son and a 9-year-old daughter, and they've never been to the playa, but they're little burners already, and you know, kind of get it by osmosis. And last year we came back, and on Saturday night we were with them here in a little village called Orient, of all places, where we made a small man out of sticks and lit it on fire on our beach. So really made it very personal. But now that same thing is happening, I guess, for all of us, and we're trying to figure out how to do Burning Man at home and bring some of these things that we've learned to our communities, which is really special.
Yeah, my daughter Camila is totally the inspiration for this work, and why I want to really think about being a part of the Burning Man community, to make it one where when she grows up as like a young Black woman, that she could feel like it could be a home too. When those words like "welcome home," that it really resonates. And I think that there is still a distance for that to really resonate for people of color. And so doing that work with the Burning Man organization with the communities, with the think cabs, trying to inspire people and give them a framework where they can be part of that movement. Because at the end of the day, when I bring her home for the second time, I want her to really feel like it's true. And we also say like, "Oh, you've never been to Burning Man?" And she's like, "Yes, I remember. There was dusty and there was fire and there were monsters driving through the night." I'm like, "That's pretty accurate." And
Yeah.
so, but when we think about it, she actually was a Burning Man, but she was when my wife was 6 months pregnant on the inside, walking the playa,
Right.
and somehow she has those memories, which I just feel is like a little bit of magic.
Absolutely. And I think breaking it down, it's not just 1 week a year. It's like, this is like, we need to really have, bring these things to our lives. And, it doesn't just happen there. And I think that's one of the most interesting things for me is seeing all these events happening around the world and the way that this culture is portable, and you can do a lot with it. So I think that's what makes it so interesting to me that, this idea of remixing. And I think that the 10 principles were, created by Larry in 2004. And it was something that, it's meant to be sort of an open-ended kind of guideline. It's not something that's like a directive, but I also feel like they're not like written in stone either. It's something that is, something to be worked on, like everything. This is all a big experiment. So I think the work that you are doing is so important. And I'm really excited to hear, some of your thoughts on these things.
Yeah, well, first of all, this work is for me very much a communal effort, right? I'm part of the Camp Que Viva, as I said before, led by Fabiana Rodriguez and other like amazing campmates, and you actually can hear on the intersection at Burning Man, which is an amazing series of podcast series that went to Burning Man in 2019 and created stories out of that done by David Boyer, which I'm going to say it here, that man needs to win an award for what he did in putting together those various stories over really just 10 days. And the final one that just dropped was about Que Viva and our work on radical inclusion equals racial inclusion and trying to push for greater diversity and equity within the Burning Man as an event and as a community. So I really want to honor those folks for the work that they did. And I think about my own journey. I was excited and terrified to go to Burning Man the first time. I remember reading the principles because one thing that you do as a person of color who's navigating spaces that are mostly white, you try to figure out like what are the rules so that I need to follow in order to give myself a sense of security. So I'm like, I need to memorize all these principles. And I started learning them and really trying to practice them. Um, but over the years, as I've grown, I went through this journey of thinking like, there's me as a black man, and then there's me as a burner. And for a long time, I felt like those were irreconcilable things. But I didn't want to be a person who was like split in half. I wanted to figure out ways in which I could show up in my full self and in my full power and identity, right? And so what I wanted to do is figure out a way to bridge that gap. And in many ways, I tried to do that with the principles. And I learned a lot by doing that. I was trying to figure out how to live the principles and so really try to understand them. And what I came to is this idea that the 10 principles are really like dualistic pairs. They operate in pairs that create the tension and the magic that we feel when folks bring that intention. Over the years, my understanding and definition of magic is one where you have the um, the combination and the coalescence or convergence of intentions of multiple people trying to have an experience. And when you all have that intentionality, you can get to start to see little things that feel like magic, right? And the 10 principles, as written by Larry, like help to create some of that. There's this tension between radical self-reliance and communal effort. What do I do and what do I do in combination with other people? There's this idea of immediacy, but immediacy is only really powerful, becomes activated and powerful with this sense of like leave no trace, right? So because we're trying to leave no trace, that creates this sense of immediacy that makes every moment feel so special. We have this idea of like radical participation, right? And the way in which we define that is actually through radical expression. The way we participate is by being ourselves, right? There's that invitation to do that. One of the things that creates so much joy is this idea of gifting, right? But within gifting, we have decommodification. So that gifting is not just about redoing the things that we've experience in the default world, but becomes something different, something maybe more. And then, of course, we have radical inclusion and civic responsibility, right? How do we create a community that, that can be one for all, while also making sure that everyone is doing their part to hold that whole together? And so those principles, I think, work in a beautiful way to create much of the magic of Burning Man. But as we are in a place where of having things like Black Lives Matter, where um, we're thinking more and more about what does it mean to like activate social justice in multiple spaces. So in many ways, for me, the principles became limited. Trying to practice them as a person of color was really hard for me, particularly as a black man. I have this experience where radical expression is something that can literally get me shot. But walking the streets in any city in America. And so I felt like I wanted to live into these principles, but I couldn't do so as a person of color. So I had this moment where after the burn last year, a friend of mine, Anna Hirsch, who's an amazing artist, you can follow her on Instagram at New Pollyanna. After the burn last year, as you'll see behind Adele, she posted this cartoon, and um, in that cartoon, she listed the 10 principles and started scratching them out. What does it look if radical inclusion become racial inclusion? What if gifting became resourcing? Things like that. And after I saw her cartoons, I gave her a call. I'm like, this is brilliant. This is the thing that I've been needing to think about, to meditate, to figure out how I can start to reconcile those different parts of me. And we made a pact with each other that before the burn next year, 2020, so I'm a full like 20 hours ahead of schedule, I was going to try to create a listing of what it would look like to rethink all of the 10 principles from a social justice lens. So this for me is my kind of like post-burn epiphany moment. It's me making this commitment to following through on that Burning Man project, and it's also a gift that I want to give to the community, a way that we could take all the movement around social justice that has been happening and continues to happen now, and how can we actually activate that within the framework that is Burning Man and the communities that we have.
Yeah, that's I would love to hear your perspectives on it. So do you want to go through each one? You want
Yeah.
to start with maybe radical inclusion?
Yeah, so radical inclusion equals racial inclusion. That just has to be the starting point with me. That's the one that I really centered my last year on. And thinking about, okay, how do you make this radical inclusion thing work? So radical inclusion is an amazing concept. In many ways, the 10 principles kind of line up closely to the American founding documents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, where they have these really great lofty goals, and we fall short of actually living them, right? If you look at the population of Black Rock City, it's less than 1% Black, and only a smattering of all different things. And as one person said, one of my favorite quotes is that Burning Man is diverse in that it brings together white people from all across the globe, right? And so, like, if that is where we've gotten to with radical inclusion, like, we aren't really practicing that in reality. So I think the important thing to think about is, like, how do we turn radical inclusion into racial inclusion? Because a founding idea for me, as I've done my political education, is that there's nothing in the United States that's ever been radical without the inclusion, participation, and leadership of people of color. So there's nothing we can't have any principle that is radical. It doesn't have to center the experiences of people of color within it. And so I want that to be a transformation, not just radical inclusion where it creates a space for white folks who feel otherwise left out of other parts of like white culture, but actually how do you or white spaces, but how do they actually create a place where there's the opportunity for everybody to be part of it, for everyone to participate, and what does it take to do that? It's not just oftentimes we'd love to say like anyone can come to Burning Man, you just need to get a ticket, but we know because of structural racism, because of the structural systemic racism and the impacts in terms of opportunity and privilege, that means that that it's not just an even playing ground. Not everyone can just come because of all those things, and so you actually have to take active steps to make sure that you have a welcoming table. that brings everybody into the space. And yeah.
Great. And what about civic responsibility?
Yeah, I think civic responsibility really builds on that idea, right? Like, um, the difference between passive and active activism, right? If you're thinking about if you're thinking about ways in which you can have radical inclusion and racial inclusion, you have that's something that actually requires a collective accountability. So right now we have this idea of civic responsibility, which is the way in which we follow the rules and the laws and all those different things. And is the way the principle has been written to date, right? It's about being like good neighbors, law-abiding citizens. I think that's a good intent, but within that, I think we actually need to move from that idea to collective accountability. So the transformation that happens there is that it's not about being accountable to a law because it's a law, because we know that laws have been discriminatory, laws have been ones that have been done in a way that have actually done a lot of harm to communities, particularly communities of color. But it's more about moving to a sense of collective accountability and responsibility for the impact that we as a community, that we as an event, and we as a network have within the world. Um, our responsibility is not just one to Black Rock City, but it's actually a global accountability. The fact that Burning Man exists is a tremendous exercise in privilege. I can't think of. I often think about what would it be like if I called 85,000 Black folks together to occupy federal land and just like do all the things? Like that would be shut down super quick, right? And so to have Burning Man is a privilege, and the way in which you um, work with privilege is that you must pay it forward. You must think about the collective responsibility we have to each other and that we have to the communities within which we are in conversation, and think about how we can really build that collective accountability in multiple spaces.
Okay, and how about communal effort?
Um, Communal effort is the grounding point for me. It's about how we do everything together. But it's about how we do everything together. But the more I think about communal effort, what are we really trying to say? I think what we're trying to say is collective care. Collective care is about how we care for each other. When I think about communal effort, it's still within this capitalist framework of like, what is the work that you're putting in? What is the work I'm putting in? And we try to figure out like, is our work equal? But what if we turn that on its head and we say, it's not about work, but it's about care. It's about how we care for each other. That creates a space where everyone's skills can really be seen and recognized and be honoring, right? It's not about commoditizing the work that we do, but it's really about caring for each other. What I love about this idea too is that the magic of Burning Man for me often happens within its rituals. The rituals that we have over the progression of the week. We have the migration of arriving to the burn. We have burn night. We have the burning of the temple. We have the rituals that happen throughout the days, and those things that we do as a community together create a sense of meaning and belonging, and I think are really powerful ways in which everything we do becomes sacred and feels sacred in that space. What would it look like if we practice collective care in every space that we're in? What if every action, every dance, every making of a meal, every sitting down together, every movement through space, the work that we do, what if we start to think about those all as sacred acts? I think that is in service of collectively caring for each other. I think that could be a transformative way to really work, live, and move through the world.
Wow, that sounds very beautiful. I love it. But radical self-reliance.
Yeah, so self-reliance is one that is it's one of the principles that I have the most struggle with, to be honest, because in many ways when you are the way in which radical self-reliance is practiced is often people saying like, go do it yourself. It's like, hey, I'm trying to do this amazing art project and I need this thing. And someone's like, radical self-reliance, that's not practicing a principle. That's really just being an asshole. right? And so what I would like to do is to say, instead of it being radical self-reliance, what would it be to look at it as radical interdependence? How do we work together? How do we support each other, right? Rather than communal effort and self-reliance being in opposition, how do we understand that part of what we want to do, the intention there, is for each person to show up as their best selves, but knowing that we show up as our best selves in community. Humans are communal actors, right? And so when we are together, we become our best selves. I always think about that phrase, I am because we are, right? And so how do you make yourself do the work, the preparation, the reflection to show up as your best self, but do so in a way that you can show up for your community. Showing up for yourselves feels limited, but showing up for each other, that is where power happens. That's where change happens. That's where movement building occurs. And so radical interdependence allows us to see the ways in which we are connected. And by being connected, we have more power. We can create more change and we can do more and achieve more and be more actualized in the reflections that we see around us. So from self-reliance but interdependence, I think would be a beautiful um, transition to make, and also a way of seeing ourselves around gifting. Gifting is this thing that the more that I think about it, what goes from beautiful to actually a lot about privilege, right? When we think about gifting as we currently understand it, it's often the sense of I give to you, and you should be thankful for that. But as we've seen happening during COVID and during the various um, traumas that's been happening, people have been reinvigorated in this idea around mutual aid. It's something that's a long-standing principle that activists and communities have been practicing for a long time, and it's getting more visibility. But to shift from gifting to the idea of mutual aid is one that says it's not one person giving to another, but that there is joy and beauty that's created in the exchange. Having a gift is meaningless without someone to receive it. The beauty of that gift is in that exchange. Everybody, it's a recognition that everyone, regardless of background or resources, has something of value to give. Even if all that thing is a smile, it is equal to the gift to anything that someone can make. And so it allows us to see the beauty, the value, and the just the sacredness in each other, and gives us a space where we can really think about, okay, how are we working in relationship to one another, and the point of that relationship and that coming together is really about bringing joy. Gifting isn't just a financial transaction. It's really a joy, and the joy happens in the cycle, in that connection. That's why we go to Burning Man. That's why we make that migration each year, is to be together and to be together to see each other and to be seen. And shifting an idea from gifting, which is a very one-sided transaction, to one that's about mutual aid and joy, allows everyone to be part of that exchange and part of creating that sense of the beautiful.
Okay, and I guess decommodification comes after that.
Yeah, so decommodification was often linked with gifting, so you're not trying to just like buy a thing, and give it to someone, but it's really about thinking about like how do we push back against capitalism. But in many ways, when we do the decommodification, we're just thinking about objects. So I want to say, if we want to be radical, go beyond decommodification and actually start to think about decolonization. What does it mean to be a community that literally occupies indigenous land, right? That's what we do. We go to indigenous native lands, and we occupy it for a time. And we even have these ideas of the 10 principles as something to be spread, which is a very colonial mindset. So I invite people to start thinking about decolonization. How do we honor the history of the place that we're in, to recognize that we're not, as Berners and as Black Rock City, we're not the only thing that's ever been there. There are things that have been there before. There'll be things that are there after. And to take away that kind of like Western decolonizing aspect out of the way in which we operate in that space, a concrete way in which we can do that is to take active steps to say, hey, we want to no longer do cultural appropriation, right? We don't want to appropriate culture specific of other, appropriate the cultures of other peoples, particularly when they've already listed those grievances. Invite Burning Man as an organization and burners as a community to really interrogate what it means to do um, to do cultural appropriation and to stop that right now, because that's a way in which we can actually live more in line with our values. It's not just about the objects. It's not just about taking off corporate tags or corporate branding, but it's really all about the way in which we can decolonize our minds. We can decolonize the way in which we interact with other folks, and so we're not an occupying force, but we can actually be working in solidarity and moving forward in a way that allows us to be part of a larger global community.
How about leave no trace?
So that's actually very much connected to the idea of decolonization, right? Leave no trace. The more you think about it, it's really this idea that of privilege that says I can show up in a place, and because I'm such a special snowflake, that we can actually do some work and like not have an impact. But that is something that I disagree with. And just by being in a place, in a space, you're going to have an impact on it, right? And so rather than trying to shirk the responsibility that involves, what does it look like to think more, not just as like I can disappear, but how can we be beautiful stewards of the space and the land in which we are in for the time that we are there. So moving from leave no trace towards this idea of stewardship, right? How do you be a good steward of the land? And to be a good steward of a land, to be a good steward of a place, is to honor that place, to honor its history, to recognize that you are a moment in time, and how do you actually leave it better than what you found it in a way that's not just purely defined by you, but that's collectively defined. Um, we don't want to just disappear our city, but but in the creation of it and the burning of it, we want to create a space where other people can build on that. Can build on those ideas. So to become stewards makes us think about the way in which we must educate ourselves about the environment, the way we must educate ourselves about other cultures, the way we must educate ourselves about history in order to understand the impact we have had, that we could have, and in intentional ways make sure that the impact that we're having is one that is about having a positive impact and recognizing our place in history in a way that's humble.
Yeah. How about participation?
Participation, that's like one of the things that I've gotten from being in the Burning Man community is learning more and more about consent culture and the volumes of text and learnings and people who've taught me about the importance of consent and how it's so empowering for folks. And so this idea of participation can sometimes be perverted on Playa, where people are like, oh, you have to play this game that I'm doing because participation, right? Like that's what you're supposed to do. But that is really someone imposing the idea of like what is fun on you. But if you move from participation to consent, you're shifting the power. And any work that's around equity is about shifting power, right? And so what we can do is to think about ways in which that we can do consent, but in an affirmative way, right? So in order for there to be consent, something has to be accessible. I think about camps like accessibility camps and others that are doing active work to try and make the playa, make Burning Man physically more accessible. But what are the ways we're also trying to make it culturally more accessible too? And an important part of, and by doing that, we give each individual the ability to affirmatively consent to their participation in the space. Not just about participating, but it's about the power. And when we want to have that sense of transformation, that sense of self-actualization that comes from our experiences, our participations in the rituals, it's not just that we do it, but that we're making a choice to say, I am going to be here now. It's that we're making a choice that like, I want to be in this. And by making that choice to be part of a gift exchange, to be part of a ritual, to be part of a build, to show up as your full self, that sense of power and empowerment is what creates a transformation and light in people. That's where the fire comes from. And so I really want to think about ways in which we're not just like having participation, but really centering the consent and the empowerment piece of it, so that you can get people who leave Burning Man alive and on fire.
Okay. How about self-expression?
So self-expression was the idea that like totally terrified me, like I said before, and I've been doing a lot of reckoning. That's when I'm just like, I don't know. My first time I showed up to Burning Man, I was just like, okay, I gotta self-express, but that seems really hard, so I'm just gonna do what I think white people do. So I showed up to Burning Man in cargo pants and a button-down shirt because I'm like, that's what the white people wear, so I'm gonna blend in. And I was like, oh shoot, not those white people apparently. So once I saw what everybody else was donning, and so self-expression for me has really been this like journey, like trying to find things that work and trying on things that don't work. I was like, all the cool burners have tails, so I'm gonna like try and wear a tail. I'm like, I feel ridiculous right now wearing this tail. So I did that for like a day and then I stopped. And where I got to is that it's not really about self-expression, right? It's about self-acceptance. Show up as you are. Show up in whatever way works for you. And the burn can be the space that allows you to try on different parts of yourself, to practice being in practice parts of you that you might be afraid to do, but to give yourself the permission to say yes. It might be yes for a moment, it might be yes for a lifetime. But if you combine that idea from participation to consent with radical acceptance, how do we accept people as they are? Maybe back then, cargo jeans, cargo shorts, and button down was me fully accepting myself, right? And so if we do acceptance, then that would have been okay, right? And I think one of the things that we could do that's radical and transformative in a world that is built so much around anti-blackness, that rejects black beauty, that rejects black and brown voices, that says that we are not enough to be in this world. The radical thing that we can do is to accept ourselves and to accept other people as they are. And if you can combine that idea of radical self-acceptance with racial inclusion, you can be this transformative. Burning Man can be this space for transformative change, and I've seen it happen. People coming, particularly my brothers and sisters of color, coming to be here and to be seen for a moment. That creates this fire within us that wants that experience and that reality to be the one that we live in, not just so that we have for 1 week of the year, but that we want to have all the time. A lot of my work around racial and social justice organizing is because I've had these moments of radical acceptance on playa, and I'm like, it's not enough to just have this in the desert. I need this to be everywhere for everyone all the time. That is my fuel. And it's not about expressing myself, but it's about me accepting myself, particularly in a world that says that that I am not enough, and learning to lean into my power, to lean into my kingness as a black male in a country that's not treated black kings particularly well.
And finally, immediacy.
Immediacy, yeah, that's the thing that we're in this moment, right? And I remember like feeling immediacy is often practiced as something that is just so short, right? And I was like, oh, immediacy, like I want to be at this thing, I want to be at that other thing, and it got me in this trap of a scarcity mindset, right? And the more I thought about it, I'm like, immediacy is just a commodification of time. And we have this value around decommodification, but we're commodifying time through immediacy by creating this sense of scarcity. But the cultures outside of like Western European cultures, they have a very different understanding of time. I understand time is something that can be expensive. And the more I've done my own cultural and political education, I've learned to think of time as something that is cyclical. I live in the time of my ancestors. I live in the time of those people to whom I will be an ancestor. We're all existing at the same moment. Time is intersectional, right? The past speaks to the present, and the present helps inform what the future will be. And so we have the idea that time is longer and bigger. We borrow from different cultural traditions, which have a very different conception of the elasticity of time. And we start to think about time not as something in which we have to be immediate, and that's the energy, but we start to think about gratitude. How grateful I feel that when I am on playa, I feel like I can commune with my ancestors. How grateful I feel that before my daughter was even born, I felt like I was able to speak to her in my prayers to her to come into our lives. The beauty and gratitude I feel for just being able to be seen and to witness others as they're lighting themselves on fire in all these ways, and knowing that that will burn throughout the year. The gratitude I feel when the man burns, to know that all the things that have been holding us back can be destroyed, and that we have the opportunity, the inspiration, really, to create something new and different each year. In many ways, I think about folks who say that thing that, like, oh, Burning Man was better last year. And I was like, yeah, but that's not what Burning Man's about. Like, we build a city to burn it down so that we can create the space for new things. It's never going to be better last year. It's always going to be better next year, because it's something that we iterate, that we create anew, that we make relevant to a new group of people, to a new community as we transform and we evolve. We are an evolving culture. And so if we can practice in each moment to have gratitude for that, gratitude for what was, what will be, and where we are now, holding those sensibilities as things that can happen in multiple spaces and multiple times, I think we have the opportunity to transcend this moment and just live in that space of gratitude.
Wow. Thank you, Marlon. That's really that's a lot of work that you've done, and I think it's a super interesting thing to think about. And I guess we can open it up for some questions.
Hi, Adelle back again. Marlon, there's quite a few things that that you've said that and your experience that I've related to. So I come from Malaysia, which is in Southeast Asia, and I come from a mixed family background of Iraqi Jew and Chinese, and I grew up in a Muslim country. And so, you know, the whole time I never really felt like I fit in. And then I moved to Australia, and then I moved to the US. But growing up, I never grew up around Black people or white people. And so moving to these different countries and societies, I feel like I had to learn a lot of the social constructs and rules in order to fit in and to be accepted. So, you know, thanks for sharing your experience. It's really kind of helped frame some of the things that I've been thinking about. To something Jamila Reddy said on the KLW
Yeah, KLW, the what's called
intersect.
The intersection goes to Burning Man, which is an amazing series. Everyone should, like, after you finish listening to this, you should go download all those podcast series. It's just an amazing set of stories from the 2019 burn.
And I see Jamila is actually in here, so I hope I don't misquote you. But you said something that really struck to me, where you said that you felt like you were asking people to cook a meal for you, and they didn't, that you knew how to cook, but they didn't have the right recipe. And then, you know, you're trying to talk people through how to cook this recipe, but they didn't have the ingredients. And so a question I wanted to put out there, Marlon, to you is, or, you know, to Jamila, since you're here, but, you know, we're all here, and we want to stock up our pantries and get these ingredients. And, you know, we've talked about a lot of the things about reframing the 10 principles, and, you know, are there some further concrete steps that, you know, that we can get moving on?
Yeah, thank you for those. And Jamila, you are amazing. It was just so wonderful to be in camp and community and relationship with you over the last year or so. The way that I think about it is, I remember folks saying that, like, oh, you never, like, leave Burning Man hungry. And I was like, I know, right? It's just like Sunday for me. Like, the fact that for many, like, white burners, it's that idea that, like, you never go to Burning Man and, like, end up hungry seems like this, like, revelation, this transformative thing. And I'm just like, that is Sunday going to church in my family, right? Like, this idea that, like, when everyone comes together and brings a part of themselves, they bring their dish, they bring their food, they bring their stories. When you bring that all together, there's always more. That's how you create abundance, right? Like, everyone bring a little bit of what they can, and even if it feels little to them, it's the cumulative aspect of it that brings it all together to make it something more than anything that we could have as just one piece. For me, I think it's lovely in a way in which we can actually practice collective care, right? Because you're not just bringing that thing as you bring that whatever you bring to the table is an offering, right? And that is offering that's made with love. It's about holding that container in that community, and it's done when most beautifully. It can be done as a ritual. So ways in which we can really think about accepting ourselves, accepting, understanding what our gifts are, building up those gifts, and then activating them in community is a way in which I think about some of what Jamila said. In many ways, this idea of like how do we actually live into these principles um, in a way that goes beyond the principles as written and become the principles as imagined is that we sometimes we are waiting for the future to happen. But we must recognize that much of what is going to be created in the future, we can start to build with some of the tools that we have today. So what do we know that we want to have? What do we can we contribute and bring into this space and start to build the future that we're trying to imagine? And whatever I can imagine my own is always going to be limited in what we can actually imagine together. And Burning Man, I think, is a space where we can start to practice and activate that that sense of collective dreaming. We are a duocracy, right? So it's not just about dreaming, but it's about doing together. I think about some of the work that I did with people of color camp, and I remember reading about another black man killed by the police, and the weight that I was carrying for me in my heart and my soul, and knowing that I could so much be like that could be me at any point. And I wanted to think about like what would it look like to envision a world beyond racism. And I don't really know how to do that. But a couple of friends with our camp, got together and say like, we don't really know what it looks like, but it's something we could do. And so what we did is we built a pyramid, and that pyramid we put on top of it a telescope. So we don't know what it's going to look like, but you can climb that pyramid. You were able to look into a telescope and try to see a world beyond the reality that we know right now, and try to see something different. And that was something that we gave ourselves permission to do at Burning Man. And that little practice has been something that's inspired me and keep me going together in community ever since. So these are little things that we see that we can do and not just dream about things, but try them out in a little space. And if it doesn't work and it sucks, set it on fire. Try something else next year.
Cool. That's a really good advice. Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions now coming in. So one from our Mayor Bacchus, ex-Mayor Bacchus. It's a good question. It's kind of around this notion of cultural appropriation. I think there's some really fine lines between, cultural appropriation, misappropriation, and respectful appropriation. I guess, we'd like to come towards appropriation as something respectful. And, love to hear some of your thoughts around that.
So I'm still building my understanding and my education around cultural appropriation, but it's actually for me very much linked to some other ideas, right? So if we move from the idea of participation to consent, when we bring in another culture, do we have consent of the people for whom it is authentic? And if those, in many ways, people are like, is this cultural appropriation or not? I'm like, well, what is the history of this thing that you're doing? What is the history of this object that you're wearing? And do the people who own that, do they have an issue with it, right? And if they do, like they become as the kind of origin of that piece. If you don't have their consent to participate or use it in a certain way, like that for me should be the end of the story and the end of the conversation. I think also with consent is like, are you wearing this thing? Are you doing this activity because it is your form of self-expression? That's often been used as a way to get around the idea of consent. It's like, oh, it's just my form of self-expression. But if your form of self-expression is just the lazy appropriation of somebody else's stuff, then you haven't really done the work. You haven't been being reflective, and you're not really showing up as you. You're really hiding. And Burning Man isn't the place to hide. It's a place to be you, right? And so you're not. That's. I don't really see what there is to be gained in that. And I think the third piece of thinking about appropriation is that particularly when you're appropriating from cultures that have been oppressed by the majority population. So when you have Native or communities of color who are often oppressed, I often ask the question of how quickly could you drop it when the police show up, right? If you do things that are from a culture and the police show up and they start arresting all the people, well, they start arresting all the brown people, and you're just like, oh, drop the thing, I can go back into my privilege. If you can do that, then like you're not really, that's for me is the first sign that you're doing appropriation, right? If you're just trying it on and you're very ready to like let it go at a moment's notice, particularly when things start to go sideways, then that's for me a sign that you haven't really thought about it. So I ask people to like really be reflective. Like, is this really from? Is this really your expression? For the folks for whom this is authentic piece of their culture, do you have their consent? And how are you using it in a way that's respectful of the history and the meaning of it? And is this appropriation in many ways is often an expression of power, dominance, and oppression? And is that something that you really want to do as your expression of yourself?
Very good points. And we have a question from Ted, one of our other founders. So theme camps make up a large portion of the overall Burning Man community. Is there a specific action that you feel like a theme camp could take to help make Burning Man more inclusive?
Yeah, so I have a 10-year challenge for the Burning Man community, not for the org, but also more specifically through the community of people of that is Burning Man. Take these principles, either the original ones, or these ones that I've remixed to have a social racial justice lens, and each year from now to 2030, let's take one principle each year and try to dive into it and explore it. This past year for me has been radical inclusion, and how do we actually transform that to be racial inclusion? And I've really centered that as the cornerstone of my life's work, both as someone who is in the racial and social justice space, as someone for whom this is his work, as someone who is a father raising a black daughter who's part of the black community. I'm taking that idea and trying to figure out how do I live that fully? What does that mean to not just say you're included, but actually create welcoming spaces for folks? But I challenge our communities each year to really take one of these principles and try to live them as full as possible, to center an idea, an art, a project, a brick coming together around those ideas. I actually want to make this, I am going to make, stepping into my power here, right? I want to challenge Burning Man that the next year that we come together, I want the theme to be welcome home, right? And by making that theme welcome home, what I mean by that is that what does it mean for us to center regular full inclusion and make welcome home be an authentic statement that anyone, regardless of race, feels like Burning Man is truly a home. Because that for me was like that. I remember before I came to my first burn, that I knew that people were going to be saying welcome home, and I was like, skeptical. I'm walking into that White House, right? And so I wanted to think about, okay, what does it mean to challenge ourselves to have a theme of welcome home? It is about bringing us back, since we've had this year off, bringing us back to the place that many of us call home. And it's about actually extending our community and extending our values and practices so we can welcome in new people who are going to be learning about Burning Man for the first time, and with intention, rather than just by kind of lazy default, right? But with intention, trying to be radically inclusive in a way that centers racial equity, that brings in people who have different perspectives, different life experiences, different and different ideas about how to live and practice these principles. I think particularly in a world where we are more divided, to center and focus on racial equity for the next year as a way in which we move forward as a community could be one of the most radical things we ever do.
Cool. We have
I had a question, Adele. Can I ask one question?
Yeah, go for it.
So, Marlon, I'm really interested in the idea of you as an urbanist, and if we separate Burning Man from the event in the desert, and it becomes something else that then can happen in other places that make it more accessible. And we take these 10 principles as sort of a foundation that can be built upon, modified, changed, etc. Can you envision some sort of event or something, or has anything occurred in any regional event that gives you, you know, some hope or some glimmer of what it could be in the future, or what do you imagine that all that could add up to?
Yeah. What could it all add up to? I think for many, I love this phrase that of calling Burning Man the Nevada Regional. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was just like, yes, that is it, right? Burning Man started as an event, and it's grown beyond that, right? It's grown beyond its like hippie, let's like go burn stuff in the desert roots, and it's become a global community. With that, and it's become a global community, and it's also become a real city. And I think what we are struggling within this metamorphosis, for building from last year's theme, is that we haven't fully lived into our responsibility for the global impact that we're having, for the way in which we are actually shaping culture, shaping ideas, and the privileges that we take in order to be a thing, right? And if we don't step into those responsibilities and to see ourselves not just as a party, but as a city, and the responsibility of the city with so much privilege to actually be a place where we can learn and grow, then we don't deserve to be a thing. In many ways, I've seen that energy grow and become real more and more in the regionals. It starts to spread because different people see and want to practice that where they are in different places. So I think there's a gift in this year that we have off the playa is the opportunity to actually burn in place, right? To use the phrase from Shelter in Place, how do you burn in place? How do you work with your community and try to set that on fire, and not on fire in terms of just destroying things, but actually creating a space for the new? How do we love the fact that like we are a city that iterates, that we hold some of the things that worked and work well, and then we try to throw in new things. For me, one of my grounding principles is this African idea of Sankofa, of looking back in order to step forward. And what's key about that is like you look back, what worked last year, and some of it was great, and some of it was terrible, and some of it was racist, right? And so how do we like not do that, and do the reflection around that, and step forward into creating a new city that is more better, right? We think about, even though Burning Man is a global city, it is a uniquely American city in that its foundation is based on white privilege and white supremacy. And so what we have to do in order to move forward is to go towards the idea of making it more perfect. And Burning Man has this opportunity to do that in a way that no other place can do, and that it can recreate itself, rebuild itself, and reconstitute itself. And that's not just the physical place, but it's the community that supports that. The more that I've been in the virtual Burning Man world and all the different things over the last week, I'm more affirmed that Burning Man is not about not just a place in the desert, but it is a network and a community of people who are inspired to by the light and the fire within themselves, and to turn that fire outwards into something so we can find each other, and so that we can be an inspiration to the world in many ways, and to recognize that as we do that, we are imperfect. We come from the soup of racial injustice and oppression and privilege, and how do we actually consciously move forward into a more better space? We are the city that disappears and comes back. There's no point to doing that unless we can come back better. Come back more whole, come back with more intention, with more gratitude, and a deeper sense of what we can do together.
Actually leads really nicely into the next question from Sonia. And Marlon, you've experienced this virtual burn too now. We've met on the virtual playa. Sonia asks, how effectively do you think this year's virtual BRC has removed barriers to entry? For example, low to no entry fees, no gear, and similarly low time commitment, encouraging better Black, Indigenous, people of color, and representation.
So last night, I had the experience of taking my little brother, who will never, ever, ever go to Burning Man, to Burning Man. I got him to like get on the computer, set up an account, and went to brcVR, and I spent like an hour or two taking him around to Mayan Warrior, and to the temple, and to the Disorient camp, and all the different spaces within that space, to the roller disco and all that stuff, and get to give him just a very basic sense of it. And for me, it wasn't just about seeing the spaces, but it was that like herding migration effect. It was like we showed up in a place and we found a friend that I knew, and they're like, okay, let's go on this like adventure together. And we went to this other place together, and we ran into someone, and we had those conversations that were enlightening, with people telling their stories and sharing themselves. And then we went to somewhere else, and we lost some people along the way, but we had another adventure. But that sense of spontaneity, that sense of adventure, that sense of possibility, um, is living in the United States. We create so much of our lives that it's as a person of color. So much of my life is about like, how do I leave my family at the end of the day and navigate safely home alive? Like that's like a just a basic struggle of my existence in America. And the idea of being able to be in Burning Man where I can be excited about what might happen, about the connections that might be created, about the gifts that might be received or given along that space, and the way in which I might be seen or accepted by someone in a story, in a hug, in just being, is super exciting. And I think that the people who put the effort into the virtual worlds did an amazing job of trying to recreate that feeling in that space. But at the end of the day, Burning Man in Black Rock City is just a container. And for any container, what makes it beautiful is the way in which we fill it with our intention and our energy. And as I said in some of the principles, the way in which you can practice collective care and the way in which we practice ritual, to the degree that those get recreated in the virtual world, they become an indicator of what could happen in this space. It becomes an indicator of what is possible for us. And so it's about the people. We build the container as best as we can, but the people filled with intention. People and their intentions is what creates the magic that we say is Burning Man.
Yeah, thank you, Marlon. And I just want to, we're getting to the top of the hour, and we have one more question. And just before that, I just want to speak quickly about intention. And there was some comments earlier in the chat about being overly sensitive. And, it was pointed out that overly sensitive is a microaggression. And I think, a thought I have around that is that if we're being sensitive around something, then maybe there is potentially some contention, and there is some history and some sensitive, there is, um, potentially some things that we should be considering. So, yeah, that's not as overly sensitive. The last question really is about, so what's your plan next? What are you going to do with the 10 principles? And yeah, you want to tell us what you're gonna do with them next?
That's right. Oh, so yeah, thank you so much for lifting that up. Often when we say people are being sensitive, that's really an expression of privilege and a microaggression. So thank you for lifting that up. And how do we actually, in order for us to be collectively responsible to each other and collectively accountable to each other, in ways in which I kind of reframe that idea, is that we actually have to create space where each person can feel safe to be their full selves. And you always, if you're going to be honoring of that, you need to take those with the least power within the space, the least power and the least privilege. Like that needs to be your centering and your starting point, right? When you do that, that's how you practice equity, and that's how you're being radical. If it is the default way of thinking to listen to the voice of privilege. But if you want to be radical, you actually start with those with the least privilege and the least voice. You lift that up, you center that work, and that's when you can create some beautiful change. So what happens next? So I'm going to be talking on BMIR on this Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. 8 o'clock Pacific time, a little bit more about the principles. And also we'll be replaying the KLW intersection with Burning Man, the one on radical inclusion equals racial inclusion episode, and talking a little bit more about these principles. In many ways, these ideas are a gift that I'm giving out to the community. Anna is going to be producing another set of cartoons to look at the way in which we've built upon the ideas from the original principles. And I'll do a blog post in the next month or so that kind of lays out the arguments of how the principles work, as is, the kind of problematic nature of it from a racial or social justice standpoint, and then what it could look like if we were to reimagine it going forward. But that part of the gift only really gets activated if people take them and try to practice them. I really again want to make that call to action to like how do we take our gifts, our life experiences, our ways of thinking, and try to practice these principles, not just at Burning Man, not just for 1 week, but actually throughout the year, and also to do that where we are in the communities in which we live. So we travel sometimes halfway across the country to find community. But what about the community right where you are? You live in one neighborhood. What would it look like to cross that kind of imaginary border to go into a different community, and not to like bring something, but just to listen, just to be grateful, to learn about the history, to see who the people, how the people are doing, and what they know, what is the beauty and the insight that they have, just to learn, to reflect, and to practice gratitude. So I'll be putting out those gifts. I'm not really sure the platform yet, but maybe Burning Man will give me a space to do that. And then from there, it's really about the community coming together to activate these. Burning Man is, as always, an idea. What we do with it and how we create from it, that is where the magic begins.
I think it's up to all of us to take these new principles and share them and discuss them. You know, I'm sure you don't want us to also take these as gospel, and we should have our own conversations around them and decide what works for our camp and what works for our communities, and spread the love there. So thank you so much. We've recorded this, and we'll be sharing this also, I think probably on some of the Disorient platforms. And yeah, hopefully you all can share this and have further conversations. Burning Man is going on, so I won't hold you any longer. There's many verses to go and immerse yourself with other people. And Marlon, what worlds are you going to be in?
brcVR, and I'm gonna try out each one of them in different ways. And if people want, you can find out more about me and follow my stuff. I'm at Marlon H. Williams because I'm a bureaucrat on all the different things. So just look for me there.
And what's a good way to learn more about the work that Que Viva has been doing?
Um, I I'll take a listen to the story, follow through and look at the petition that was presented, and see some of the demands and figure out from those demands, particularly for folks who are in camps and camp leaders, how can you activate that in your camp as you're thinking about the community that you're trying to bring on Playa next time that we can be together. How do you activate some of those ideas and those demands in the space and the art that you bring, the communities that you form, the activities that you create, those different types of things. So making sure that Burning Man is not just a thing that we we do, but it's something we actually help to shape. And I think the learning from the people, the color of change work is really beautiful way to think about them and say, not just wait for somebody else to do them, but how do we do them ourselves and the way in which we burn.
Thank you, Marlon. This has been amazing to have you in Disorient, and it's our 20th anniversary as a camp, and most camps don't last that long. It really it requires some special whatever it is, but there's a lot of love in our camp. We've had a love ministry for a long time, and one of the things we learned is that we have to take care of, we want to do all these things that face outside, but we have to take care of ourselves in order to do that and each other. And I think this, your words have been vitally important to that mission of learning and being good burners and being good examples. So thank you so much for being with us tonight and coming to our camp. And we look forward to having you back and hearing how it goes. And just huge gratitude to you, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Yeah, I'll come back next year. I decide that it was all wrong and I do something different.
All good.
All right.
Thank you.
All.
Cheers. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.